Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. My name is Ethan Crawford, and my wife is Melissa. We've been married for 17 years. 17 years that once felt like a gift, now feel like a slow descent into something I no longer recognize. Our family consists of two wonderful children. Our son Dylan, who's 9, and our daughter Sophie, who just turned 8. Melissa has been coming home late from work constantly these past few months, and tonight was no exception. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she finally walked through the door. By then, the kids and I had already finished dinner and homework. They'd been in bed for about an hour, apparently not understanding either the absence of their mom or its cause. This pattern has deeply upset me. For the past hour, I've been carefully analyzing our financial situation, and what I've discovered has left me cold. Over the past 2 years, our finances have deteriorated significantly. Our income has dropped dramatically, but Melissa didn't seem to notice. She continued to spend money without hesitation, as if our financial difficulties didn't exist. Just minutes ago, I finished paying the last bills, realizing that we'd barely be able to hold out for a few more months. Against the background of this alarming situation, I thought about my life plans and what lies ahead. I may have made a grave mistake. For the past 2 years, I've been fixated on an impending time bomb, not knowing if it would eventually explode. I always expected something to happen, but over the years, doubt began to overcome me. I couldn't determine how long I'd been standing at this crossroads. Lately, I've been more and more lost in my thoughts, and as a result, I've lost track of time. In the end, she broke the tense silence. She crossed her arms and put on her usual expression of contempt. "Ethan, I want a divorce." At that moment, I was struggling to sort out my emotions. My spirit was so heavy with doubts and self-loathing that I was almost numb to these new feelings. The situation could not be called humorous, but despite its seriousness, I tried to suppress laughter. After 17 years of marriage, my wife suddenly announced that our journey together was coming to an end, and that everything we painstakingly built would be destroyed. Surprisingly, a long-forgotten feeling flashed through me, causing an almost imperceptible smile. Relief. I looked at her, allowing myself a farewell tour of the cherished memories of our happy days. But soon, harsh reality reasserted itself. I was a more skilled programmer than a manager. Unfortunately, in the professional world, programmers often climb the career ladder, becoming project managers, then department heads, and finally senior managers. And so I found myself in the role of Senior Product Development Manager at Cascade Tech Solutions, a position that turned out to be more decorative than meaningful, an intricate facade for an experienced salesperson. However, among the available candidates, I was the most qualified for this position. I single-handedly created our main product line, nurtured it from the very beginning, and contributed to its growth over 6 consecutive improvements. I gained an unparalleled understanding of our product. When clients were looking for answers, I gave them. Where our employees faced problems, I found solutions for them. With a new hairstyle and an expensive suit, I certainly looked the part. The substantial salary increase and tempting benefits that accompanied my promotion were undoubtedly attractive. I can say that I'm happy with my work, but deep down, I long for the programming world that I once loved so passionately. Unfortunately, my current position didn't leave me the opportunity to indulge in programming. Countless meetings and constant phone calls took up all my time, leaving no opportunity to dive back into the lines of code. I was forced to watch as a new wave of young programmers took the reins of power into their own hands. Against the background of a group of young people striving to surpass each other with their innovations, I couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration and envy. Of course, being a boss is good, but deep down I dreamed of a different range of responsibilities. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that I was eventually fired from my position at Cascade Tech Solutions in Seattle. To tell the truth, if I was responsible for myself, I would have made the same decision. My attendance at meetings became rare at best, and numerous missed deadlines did not yield results. Although I didn't seek dismissal, I didn't make much effort to maintain my position at CTS. I was in a state of prolonged frustration. It took almost 3 months before I was finally able to overcome the initial state of depression and gather strength for further work. Unfortunately, my attempts to move forward were extremely unsuccessful. It took another month of mental anguish to find a way out of the situation that had captured me. Albeit imperfect, but at least acceptable. Without a doubt, I believe that if it weren't for the presence of my children, I would have gone crazy. Their unchanging daily routine and innocent presence served as a guiding star for me, helping me to regain positivity and direction in life. Every day I followed a simple routine: breakfast, school, afternoon tea, homework, dinner, sleep. This recurring mantra became a guiding star for me, leading me on a path that I never expected. With unwavering determination, I plunged headlong into the role of a stay-at-home father, taking on all the responsibilities associated with it. Housework and driving became my new fields of activity, and I diligently took them up. To my surprise, my presence in the house brought sincere joy to the hearts of my children. It was thanks to this new connection that I began to realize my importance and the valuable contribution that I could make. Although I often felt insignificant, my wife never acknowledged any changes in our family dynamics. She didn't even seem to notice it. I met Melissa Hartwell at a fraternity party, and I almost missed this meeting. I joined the fraternity solely to secure future opportunities for myself after graduation, not to throw parties during my studies. I was convinced that I would need any help I could find. I wasn't worried about my academic performance, as my grades were excellent. But in everything else, height, weight, appearance, character, I couldn't help but feel like a completely average person. But Melissa, who had the same level of averageness, somehow managed to radiate an amazing charm. She may have been ordinary, but I was fascinated by her presence. It took me a long time to gather the courage to start a conversation with her, as I watched her from afar, fascinated by her unique charm. Perhaps our first meeting was short and inconspicuous, but in the following weeks we crossed paths again and took the opportunity to introduce ourselves to each other. Coffee dates and joint study sessions in the library soon became common for us. It took about 2 months before our first official date took place. From that moment on, my life turned into an extraordinary journey filled with 15 years of pure happiness next to Melissa. Our courtship may have been relatively short, but our engagement was even shorter. Shortly after graduation, we exchanged vows and settled into our first apartment in the bustling city of Seattle. It was an exciting chapter that marked the beginning of our married life together. Every day we set off on the same journey, getting together on the morning and evening train to our first places of work. Financially, we were barely making ends meet, but we found solace in coping with these difficulties as a team. It seemed that we had almost everything in common: family background, dating experience, interests, and aspirations. Where our preferences didn't completely coincide, we easily complemented each other. If I failed in some area, Melissa was successful, and vice versa. I took over the management of our shared finances, and Melissa shone in the development of our social ties. Together, we found a harmonious balance that allowed us to overcome life's obstacles, always supporting each other. We synchronized not only our personal lives but also family schedules. Working together as a team, we began to thrive. Over the next few years, we both received multiple promotions, which contributed to our success. Our circle of friends expanded significantly, bringing us joy and new acquaintances. We diligently saved money, which allowed us to buy our first house, and at the same time not deny ourselves the pleasure of traveling and having fun. Our intimate life reflected the development of our relationship, starting with gentle embraces and affectionate kisses on the first date. As our connection deepened, we searched for more passionate moments, eventually realizing our exclusivity. After 8 years of our life journey, Melissa made the decision to quit her job when our beloved son Dylan appeared in our lives. After the joyful birth of Dylan, our family was blessed with daughter Sophie a little over a year later. We made a significant move, buying a spacious 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Bellevue, which allowed us to accommodate our growing family and even adopt a fluffy pet. Together with the new house, we purchased a family sedan and a minivan, ensuring comfortable movement for all of us. In many ways, our life entered a pleasant average rhythm. 2 children, a beloved pet, a cozy house, and 2 reliable cars. I thought that such a state was the pinnacle of happiness, but I didn't yet know that even greater happiness was waiting for me ahead. Shortly after Sophie's first birthday, I was pleasantly surprised to receive a well-deserved promotion to the position of manager, which further increased my professional level. After the promotion, it seemed to us that the universe finally recognized what we hadn't noticed for years, that I was an ordinary person who quietly and meekly joined the general mass. The salary increase was significant. It should not be taken lightly, and we certainly didn't underestimate its importance. In addition, the advantage of a flexible schedule was added to my new position, allowing me to work most of the week from home, occasionally coming to the office for important meetings with employees and management. It's often said that money cannot buy happiness, and I fully agree with this opinion. While money may not be able to directly buy happiness, it certainly can afford certain amenities and opportunities. Thanks to increased financial stability, we were able to invest in stylish clothes and self-care, prioritize healthcare, and purchase a new home in a more attractive area. These changes led to the fact that we both gained self-confidence. I, who used to be considered average, now turned out to be slightly above average. And my wife, whom I always thought was beautiful, turned into an incredibly attractive person. Our intimate life, which was already fulfilling, reached new heights. In addition, our travels became more enjoyable, and we had the freedom to spend time with our children while saving money for future retirement. When Sophie started going to elementary school, Melissa made the decision to return to work on a part-time basis, which brought a new dynamic to our lives. She quickly got a job at a startup marketing firm called Pinnacle Marketing Group, which she believed she would like. Her daily routine was as follows. She drove the kids to school before going to the office and finished her day when it was time to pick them up. This routine was the perfect addition to our lives. Since her salary wasn't the main one we could save. According to my calculations, by the time our children graduated from college, we would have saved enough money to retire and enjoy a comfortable life. Quite by chance, just 3 months before our 15th wedding anniversary, I stumbled upon the horrifying revelation of my wife's infidelity. Ironically, this discovery happened a few weeks before my own birthday, although I didn't understand the full significance of the evidence until several days later. It took me several weeks to connect all the dots and understand the truth. At first, I dismissed my wife's desire to take a more active part in work at the new place, believing that it meant she would work a few extra hours a week, and I would take on the responsibility of picking up the children from school. But these changes in our daily routine didn't have a significant impact on my schedule, and I readily took on the responsibility of picking up the children without complaint. After about 3 months, I began to notice that my wife was becoming more and more anxious and distant. Worried, I asked her about it, and she explained that she was just trying to find herself at work and was experiencing some stress. Trying to lighten her burden, I decided to take on additional responsibilities around the house. Unfortunately, our once ardent intimate life began to fade noticeably. We decided to talk openly about it, and she frankly said that she no longer felt the need to be intimate with the same frequency, citing her age. It was the first time I heard such frank words from her, but we made efforts to rectify the situation. After a little revival, our intimate life came to a halt again, and I didn't dare to touch on this topic for fear of provoking a quarrel. I was close to breaking down when an unexpected find forced me to face the truth. The weather got noticeably colder a few weeks before my birthday, and I started looking for my sweater. Since I took on the duties of the house, I sometimes confused the closets in which our clothes were stored. Rummaging on the shelf of my wife's closet among a collection of old shoe boxes, I came across a hidden gift. It was impossible not to notice. A pink box decorated with a white ribbon, clearly from a lingerie store. My excitement increased when I noticed a postcard addressed to my beloved. A brief internal struggle ensued in my head. Should I immediately delve into its content or be patient and wait? In the end, curiosity won out and I decided to open it. The anticipation that after reading the postcard I would admire my wife didn't allow me to restrain my impatience. I grinned when I read the message, which kindly asked for forgiveness for wrapping the gift early. You can unwrap your true gift on your birthday, the contents of this box. And when I put on what's inside, you can take my last remaining innocence. Love, Melissa. For the next few weeks leading up to my birthday, I did my best to impress her. I met her at the door with bouquets of flowers, pampered her with foot massages, cooked her favorite dishes. But her reaction wasn't what I expected. It seemed that she simply tolerated my displays of affection. On my birthday itself, I made sure in advance that the children did their homework, hoping not to disrupt an unexpected surprise. But I was shocked when Melissa came home late from work. To my bewilderment, she asked what we would have for dinner. However, I was willing to play along with her to keep the element of surprise. I offered to go for pizza, which elicited cheers from the children. Having decided on our plans, we set off. But as soon as we were about to leave, the kids performed a heartfelt song, "Happy Birthday," for me. Surprise flashed in my wife's eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. "I'll give you your present later, Ethan," she said, smiling. The drive home was filled with tension, and I narrowly avoided an accident. The 15 minutes spent waiting for the children to get ready for bed seemed excruciatingly long to me. The next 15 minutes of waiting for them to fall asleep were no less excruciating. Fortunately, Melissa returned from an urgent trip to the store for milk shortly after they fell asleep. When I got to the bedroom door, I noticed that Melissa wasn't in the room. I lay down on the bed and waited. After a while, she came out of the bathroom dressed in a long flannel nightgown, without makeup, with her hair in a ponytail. By this point, I was already beginning to feel a slight disappointment from the picture that was happening. "When will I finally get my gift?" I asked. She joined me in bed, slipped under the covers, and reached out to turn off the lamp in the bedroom. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said. She opened the drawer of the bedside table and took out a small square box wrapped in bright wrapping paper with colorful balloons, which we'd used at our son's previous birthday. Handing it to me, she said, "Happy birthday, dear." With these words, she rolled over on her back, turned off the lamp, and fell asleep that I was too stunned to even open her gift. The next day, my depression flared up with renewed vigor. I kept replaying the events of the past day in my head, trying to figure out what I had done that cast a shadow on our evening. I was completely at a loss. For almost 2 weeks, I fell into despair. This cursed gift seemed to mock me, its bright pink hue almost blinking, serving as a vivid reminder of my failure. I've heard all these cliches before. The husband is always the last to know. Ignorance is bliss. And to be honest, I really was in the dark. The idea that Melissa might be unfaithful was so alien to me that it didn't even occur to me. But when she called home 13 days after my birthday, informing me of her late arrival in connection with Greg's 30th birthday, this was the first thought that struck me. The employees are arranging a party for him. "Maybe I'll come quite late," she said. I don't remember answering her or even going to the closet in the bedroom, but I remember looking at the empty place where my gift once lay. The excruciating pain in my chest and the subsequent vomiting attack in the bathroom are also vividly imprinted in my memory. For some time, which I would not like to remember, I was visited by the thought that I had had a heart attack, and for a fleeting moment, I even wished that it was true, longing for the possibility of my imminent demise. Greg Brennan, Melissa's boss, was a deceitful and clever advertising manager who turned out to be several years younger than both Melissa and me. I had encountered him only once, and I remember that I felt a strong dislike for him, primarily because of his incessant insincerity in conversation. It was Sophie who brought me back to reality. "Are you okay, Dad?" Her worried voice broke through the fog in my mind, and it took me a few moments to focus on her tear-stained face looming over me. "I'm fine, honey," I reassured her, forcing a weak smile. "Dad just ate something that his stomach didn't like. I'll be out in a minute." In the end, I managed to escape from the confinement of the bathroom, although much of what happened after that remained foggy in my memory. I only remember that I reached for my forgotten bottle of whiskey, the dusty appearance of which testified to my inattention. Judging by the headache that overtook me the next morning, I realized that I had drunk several glasses in a desperate attempt to numb the pain. I didn't know when Melissa came home, but when I came across her in the kitchen feeding our children with apparent normality, it destroyed all the remaining fragments of love that I kept in myself. Only a faint tremor that flashed across her face when she sat down to eat extinguished all the remaining affection in me. It was an incredibly subtle shift, barely perceptible, but it was undoubtedly present. I would like to tell a story about how I courageously stood up to my unfaithful wife, but in fact, I was completely devastated. I was immobilized by the weight of my emotions. I could hardly find the strength to even move, and the situation only worsened further. For several weeks, I existed in a state of emptiness, being only a shell of my former self, painfully aware that my wife was just doing household chores, not paying attention to the crushing revelation. Every day I sank more and more into despair, convinced that I had already reached the lowest point imaginable. Only on the weekend, on the day of our 15th wedding anniversary, did I finally gather the strength to get out of my stupor and make a decision. Up to this point, I was wallowing in my own weakness, fully aware of my inaction. Perhaps I was in a state of shock, although most likely there's some technical psychological term describing my behavior. If my father were alive, he would just call me a fool. He was right. The fog of confusion in my mind finally dissipated when my wife told me about her plans for the upcoming trip to a work conference. It dawned on me that she would be absent on our anniversary. I couldn't understand why this fact mattered so much to me, but it just added another layer of disrespect to us. But the pain was especially acute from the fact that she didn't show any recognition of the significance of this date. When I drowned my grief and fell asleep on the night of our anniversary, when I woke up, anger rose in me. I had reached my limit. I hurriedly contacted a lawyer and made an appointment. I was determined to put an end to this pretense. I firmly believed that my life couldn't get any worse. Few people knew that I was wrong. The fierce determination with which I entered the lawyer's office was quickly replaced by a destructive feeling of disbelief. I was well aware that divorce can be a difficult process, but reality hit me like a brick. At first, I thought that my wife's infidelity would play in my favor. But to my horror, my lawyer systematically outlined the reality of my case. "Mr. Crawford," Thomas Whitfield said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I need you to understand something. In Washington state, we operate under no-fault divorce laws. Your wife's infidelity, while morally significant, has limited legal impact on the outcome. But she cheated on me." I protested weakly. "I understand, and I'm not minimizing your pain. But unless you have concrete evidence that directly affects the children's welfare, the court will focus primarily on equitable distribution of assets and the best interests of the children." He continued, his voice matter-of-fact but not unkind. "By law, your marital property will be divided equitably, which usually means equally. You have no advantages here. Moreover, you have no grounds to prove that your wife is unsuitable as a parent, so joint custody seems to be the most likely outcome." The room seemed to tilt. "What about child support? Spousal maintenance?" "Here's where things get complicated," Whitfield said. "The difference in income tips the scales significantly. You're currently unemployed. She's working. The court may very well order her to pay you spousal maintenance, at least temporarily. As for child support, that depends on custody arrangements and income levels. She'll probably retain primary physical custody, he continued. Not because she's a better parent, but because she has stable employment and you don't. The court prioritizes stability for the children. She'll likely have the right to stay in the house, at least until the children are older. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I realized that my wife was the one who had betrayed our marriage, and yet I was the one who seemed to be losing everything. What can I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Get your life in order, Whitfield said bluntly. Find employment. Document your involvement with the children. Be the best father you can be. And most importantly, don't do anything that could be construed as vindictive or harmful to your case. A few weeks later, my unfaithful spouse even had the audacity to ask about my well-being. You don't look well, Ethan. Is something bothering you? What is it? She asked, feigning concern. Meanwhile, I just drifted along with the flow of life, feeling lost and empty. And then suddenly, the news came about my dismissal from work. I didn't know yet that this would turn out to be the best thing that happened in my life. It was a glimmer of hope that came when I came across the evening news. As I sat immersed in a diet of grim news that seemed to reflect my own despondency, a glimmer of another perspective appeared. Among the stories of hopelessness, one headline caught my attention. A well-known company from the East Coast had filed for bankruptcy. Former employees were now forced to struggle with the unknown regarding their latest salaries and the fate of pensions. Strangely, this message aroused a feeling of empathy in me. It dawned on me that there were people who may find themselves in an even more difficult situation than me. But when the news anchor returned to the screen, a sobering analysis followed. While employees are likely to win a lawsuit against their bankrupt employer, it doesn't really matter in the end. The harsh reality was that they had nothing left. All the funds had disappeared, and the employees were in a state of financial collapse. It didn't take much effort to put all the fragments together. If there was nothing to take, then Melissa couldn't claim anything. We would be left with nothing, which meant we wouldn't share anything. Of course, this meant that I was sabotaging myself. But considering that I was already doomed to lose half of everything, did it really matter if I had the rest? But as I thought about it more carefully, a different realization emerged. My lawyer's words echoed in my mind. Don't do anything that could be construed as vindictive or harmful to your case. Deliberately squandering our assets would be exactly that, vindictive and harmful. It would damage my credibility with the court and potentially my relationship with my children. No. I wouldn't go down that path. Instead, I made a different decision. 2 years doesn't seem like an eternity, but the days seemed painfully monotonous, especially when I was alone most of the time. It became obvious that Melissa was the lifeblood of our circle of friends. As she moved away from me, I realized the lack of truly deep and meaningful connections. The fact that I was an only child made my loneliness even worse. I found myself in a state of deep loneliness, having prematurely lost both parents. My father from a heart attack and my mother from cancer. With their absence, I was left completely alone in this world. Although a detailed account of how I lived is likely to be tedious, I can briefly describe these 2 years as a period of profound transformation. In the midst of this devastation, my children became the only source of light in my life. I had never been prone to excessive spending. I scrupulously watched every penny spent. But I realized that I needed to invest in my future, and in my children's future, if I wanted to emerge from this situation intact. After careful consideration, I made several strategic decisions. First, I established educational savings accounts for both Dylan and Sophie, contributing a substantial sum that would ensure their college education was fully funded. This wasn't squandering, this was securing their future. Second, I enrolled in an executive MBA program. Despite the high cost of tuition, nearly $50,000 over 2 years, this was an investment in my employability. The program was conveniently located in the Seattle area, and I could attend classes while still being present for my children. Third, I replaced our aging family vehicle with a reliable SUV. Not a luxury model, but something safe and dependable that could transport my children and withstand Seattle's rainy weather. These weren't acts of revenge. They were acts of survival and forward planning. Most importantly, I devoted myself entirely to being the best father I could be. The time spent with my children was truly priceless. It became the main event of my life. It was a priority for me to encourage and support their various interests. We solved homework together, played exciting games, and our adventures included visits to parks, exciting bike rides, and trips to the cinema. Since I took on the role of home cook, they helped me with great interest. To keep them enthusiastic, I discovered some simple recipes and allowed them to actively participate in the cooking process. Melissa sometimes attended our family activities, although I didn't make any purposeful efforts to attract her to participate in them. If she decided to take part, she just did it without my involvement. Having no other recourse, I made one decision that I'm not entirely proud of, but felt necessary. I hired a private investigator. For 3 months, I received weekly reports detailing my wife's activities. At first, I thought she was only involved with her boss, Greg Brennan. The confirmation, when it came, was devastating but also clarifying. The investigator's reports were clinical and professional. They confirmed what I had suspected. Melissa was having an affair with Greg Brennan. The documentation included photographs of them entering hotels together, timestamps of meetings, and other evidence that left no room for doubt. Did it bother me? Not as much as I expected. I already had suspicions about her behavior, so the presence of concrete evidence didn't have the emotional impact I'd anticipated. Instead, I felt a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. This was real. After 3 months, I terminated the investigator's services. I had what I needed: clear, documented evidence of the affair. More importantly, I had clarity about the state of my marriage. After about a year, I realized something surprising. I hadn't felt a drop of desire or passion for intimacy since I started on this path. Surprisingly, it didn't bother me much. This only added to my understanding that my marriage was truly over, not just legally but emotionally. Despite classes, taking care of children, and my MBA program, I had a significant amount of free time. It was then that I decided to shift the focus to life after marriage, which I assumed would eventually become a reality. As part of this new direction, I started a new exercise regime. I had always maintained a decent level of physical fitness. I couldn't boast of anything outstanding. However, over time, I managed to make noticeable progress in bench press and running endurance. I believe that the presence of massive muscles and an attractive appearance are largely determined by genetics, and unfortunately, I didn't belong to either category. But nevertheless, I was personally pleased with my appearance and my health. Anticipating the need for employment in the future, I began to study the latest achievements in my former industry. It became obvious that a 1-year break from work had thrown me even further behind than I had initially thought. Therefore, I began to devote several hours a day to familiarizing myself with the latest advances in technology. I devoted a significant part of my time to studying software systems, paying special attention to my former company, CTS. It became obvious that they were experiencing a lack of progress. Despite the fact that they managed to maintain their market share and stable income, they hadn't achieved success in the technology industry. It became clear to me that in an ever-evolving field, standing still means moving backward. During my evenings, after the children were asleep, I began working on a personal project, a software add-on that could integrate seamlessly with CTS's core platform as well as 2 competing systems. It was the kind of work I'd always loved, solving complex technical problems, writing elegant code, creating something useful. I didn't think of it as a business venture at first. It was therapy. It was reclaiming a part of myself that I'd lost when I took the management position. It was remembering who I was before I became defined by my marriage, my job title, or my role as the betrayed husband. The code flowed from my fingers late into those Seattle nights, the rain pattering against the windows, the house quiet except for the soft hum of my computer. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. After about 8 months of this new routine, something changed. Melissa began to stick to a regular schedule, coming home at the usual time and even engaging in conversations with me, asking about how the day went. Naturally, I answered tersely, but she wouldn't let up. To my surprise, she began to dress more provocatively around the house, apparently trying to revive something that had long since died. A few weeks passed, and the situation intensified. For a year and a half, she'd been indifferent, just doing her duties. But now she began to express interest, voice concerns about our lack of communication, and look for answers. She started talking about restoring our marriage. I went into complete silence in response. Her attempts at reconciliation continued until her birthday came. On this day, I left her gift on the dining table. It took half a year before I finally opened the last birthday present I'd received from my wife. I'd come across my birthday present in the impulse shopping section of our local convenience store. A watch with a cheap digital dial, priced at $9.95. At first, I'd felt a surge of anger when I realized that my gift was a last-minute purchase at a convenience store. But soon this annoyance dissipated when I noticed that they had a suitable female model. I decided to let go of my resentment and bought it, intending to give it to her later. Took 18 months before I finally handed her the watch. I would really like to have seen her reaction, but unfortunately, I wasn't there when she opened it. The children and I had an impromptu movie night, which is why we returned home quite late. The next day, she left before the children and I woke up. Suddenly, everything was back to normal. Melissa began to spend more and more time at the office, and our conversations at home became sparse once again. In the end, it happened. She said the words I expected. "Ethan, I want a divorce." I was hoping that she would quickly start the process, but it took almost a week before the papers were officially delivered. It was almost comical to read their contents. The alleged grounds were spousal and child support, uneven distribution of property in her favor, as well as claims of mental and emotional cruelty. I waited patiently. Then, the next month, on the day before a planned camping trip with the children, I made sure that they weren't around when I started to take the necessary actions. After 6 days of outdoor recreation and recuperation in the Olympic Peninsula, hiking, roasting marshmallows, telling stories by the campfire, we returned home and found Melissa waiting for us in the living room. She was sitting alone and looked unwell, probably from shock rather than any stomach virus. As I watched her, I wondered which aspect of the situation caught her off guard the most. She didn't know yet that I had filed a counter-application for divorce, stating adultery as one of the grounds, and demanding primary physical custody of the children based on my role as their primary caregiver for the past 2 years. I requested that the court consider my unemployment status and childcare responsibilities when determining support obligations. I didn't file frivolous lawsuits against her employer or her lover. My lawyer had advised against it. Such actions would make me look vindictive and could backfire. Instead, I focused on what mattered: the welfare of my children and a fair resolution. However, I did take one strategic step. I'd sent Melissa's parents copies of the investigators' reports, not out of spite, but because I believed they had a right to know what was happening to their daughter and grandchildren. It was also a clear signal. I wasn't afraid to present the truth. When the children had a snack and went to their rooms to get ready for bed, they didn't seem to pay any attention to their mother. In turn, she didn't make any attempts to communicate with them. I went to the refrigerator to get a beer and then settled in the living room on a chair opposite Melissa. She didn't look me in the eye for quite a while, and I just focused on enjoying the drink. Not only did she look unwell, but she was crying. Perhaps out of resentment, perhaps out of genuine remorse. In the end, she plucked up the courage and spoke in a barely audible voice. "It will ruin me." I waited patiently for her to meet my gaze, wanting to see her reaction to my answer. A few moments passed, but when her eyes finally met mine, I couldn't help but think, God, I hope not that I didn't want her ruined. I wanted her accountable. There's a difference. I expected this moment to bring some satisfaction, but one tear that appeared in her eyes left me feeling strangely hollow. When a tear escaped and flowed down her cheek, I couldn't help feeling detached. Do you hate me that much? Melissa asked, her voice full of pain. I took a pause to collect my thoughts and answered, No, Melissa, I don't hate you. Hate takes effort. To be honest, I haven't put any effort into you at all. All my attention and energy are focused exclusively on taking care of myself and our children. She tried to intervene, but I continued. That's enough. I won't allow you to rewrite history or paint yourself as the victim here. You made choices. Those choices have consequences. But I'm not interested in destroying you. I'm interested in protecting my children and rebuilding my life. There was a long silence before she spoke again, desperation in her voice. What should I do now? I thought for a moment before answering. Is this a rhetorical question? Or do you really want to hear my advice? Without giving her a chance to answer, I continued. I believe you need to figure out what you want from your life. Not what I want, not what Greg wants, not what your parents want. What you want. You need to take responsibility for your actions and their impact on our children. And you need to understand that whatever happens from here, we're not going back to what we were. That's gone. I stood up. The children and I are going to bed. You should probably think about finding somewhere else to stay while we work through the legal process. It's not healthy for any of us to be under the same roof right now. The divorce process was complicated, but not in the ways I'd feared. My lawsuits against Melissa's employer went nowhere, as my lawyer had predicted. Without clear evidence of workplace sexual harassment or gross misconduct that directly affected me, I had no standing. Greg Brennan faced no legal consequences from me, though I heard through the grapevine that his reputation at Pinnacle Marketing suffered significantly once word of the affair got out. The settlement we eventually reached was far from the dramatic victory I'd once imagined. Melissa and I were awarded joint legal custody of Dylan and Sophie, with me receiving primary physical custody based on my role as their primary caregiver for the past 2 years. She would have them every other weekend and one evening per week, with holidays split equitably. The house was sold, with proceeds divided equally. Neither of us could afford to maintain it alone, and frankly, neither of us wanted to live there anymore. Melissa was ordered to pay modest child support based on her income and the custody arrangement. There was no spousal support in either direction. We'd been married long enough that the court considered us both capable of supporting ourselves, despite my current unemployment. I received no windfall settlement, no $1 million payout, no dramatic financial victory. What I received was something more valuable. Primary custody of my children, a clean break, and the freedom to rebuild my life on my own terms. After the divorce, life became complicated in new ways, but also simpler in others. I completed my executive MBA program, which opened doors I hadn't expected. More importantly, the personal software project I'd been developing in my spare time, the integration platform for CTS and its competitors, began to attract attention. I'd started my own small company, initially just licensing the software to a few clients. Within a year, I received purchase inquiries from all 3 major companies in the space, including CTS. The final deal wasn't worth millions, but it was substantial enough to provide financial stability. More significantly, CTS offered me a position as Vice President of Design and Development, a role that combined my technical skills with strategic oversight, but allowed me to stay connected to the actual work of programming. I accepted. With my newfound financial stability, I hired Mrs. Ruth Patterson, a kind-hearted elderly woman who served as both housekeeper and part-time caregiver for my children when my work schedule conflicted with their needs. Over time, our relationship grew stronger, and she became like family to us, a grandmother figure the children had been missing since my parents' deaths. Mrs. Patterson lived in a small apartment I'd added above the garage of our new home, a modest but comfortable house in a good school district in Redmond. She personified the role of a grandmother for my children, radiating warmth and kindness but showing firmness when necessary. But her invaluable advice stood out especially. Having lived a rich life, she offered the children a unique perspective, which I appreciated very much. As a father, I loved my children unconditionally and tried to be a support and source of care for them. But I couldn't deny the scars, cynicism, and rigidity that had formed inside me. In moments of uncertainty, she became my reliable confidant and advisor, giving guidance and wisdom. Over the years, the children grew into adults, and I treasured the opportunity to watch them thrive. Dylan became a mechanical engineer, passionate about renewable energy. Sophie pursued psychology, perhaps influenced by the family dynamics she'd witnessed growing up. I didn't hold a grudge against them when they chose to maintain relationships with their mother. In fact, I encouraged it. Whatever had happened between Melissa and me, she was still their mother, and they deserved to form their own relationships with her, free from my bitterness. Our once close bond evolved as they became independent adults with their own lives, partners, and eventually children of their own. This was natural and healthy, even if it left me feeling sometimes lonely. Mrs. Patterson stayed on until the kids left for college, after which she retired. As a token of gratitude, I offered her continued free accommodation and support. For 15 years, she'd been present in my life. Throughout our relationship, she tirelessly tried to convince me that I needed to rediscover the joy of life and find someone with whom I could share it. I sincerely appreciated her efforts, but the truth was, I'd built walls that were difficult to dismantle. After the experience with Melissa, it was very difficult for me to open up to anyone again. My friendships became cordial but somewhat superficial. I rarely dated, except for a few outings organized by colleagues or acquaintances. Over time, I gained a reputation as someone competent and successful in his field, but also somewhat distant and difficult to know. I understood that this isolation was, in part, a consequence of my own choices and self-protection mechanisms. Mrs. Patterson passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 89, surrounded by me and the children. At her funeral, I realized that she'd been one of the few people who'd truly known me in those difficult years, and one of the even fewer people I'd allowed to know me. The next significant encounter with Melissa took place 16 years after our divorce, unexpectedly, at our daughter Sophie's wedding. Although the children occasionally mentioned their mother, they never discussed her with me in detail, respecting the complicated history between us. I knew she'd struggled after the divorce. Multiple job changes, a move away from Seattle, financial difficulties. But I'd made a conscious decision years ago not to monitor her life or interfere with it. It was at Sophie's wedding that I was shocked by Melissa's physical and emotional state. As it turned out, she'd managed to remarry several years after our divorce. But her life had taken a tragic turn. On her wedding day to her second husband, an adventure enthusiast named Robert, they'd planned a tandem skydiving jump as part of their celebration. Something had gone wrong during the jump. Robert died on impact. Melissa survived but suffered severe spinal injuries that left her with limited mobility and chronic pain. She used a wheelchair most of the time now, though she could walk short distances with assistance. She'd also gained significant weight, the combination of limited mobility, depression, and medication. She had deep wrinkles around her mouth from years of stress and smoking. In general, she looked much older than her 56 years, elderly and worn down by life. But behind everything else, I still saw traces of the woman I had once loved. The college student with the amazing charm, the young mother who'd cradled our newborn babies, the partner who'd once complimented my weaknesses with her strengths. I didn't feel anything romantic for her. That had died long ago. But I felt something unexpected, a deep, profound sadness. After the ceremony, during the reception, I found myself walking toward her table. Sophie had seated her mother with some distant relatives, thoughtfully placing her where she could observe but wouldn't be in the center of attention. Melissa looked up as I approached, surprise, and something like fear crossing her face. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Melissa." I pulled out a chair and sat down beside her. You've been through a lot." She laughed, a bitter sound. "That's one way to put it." We sat in silence for a few moments, watching our daughter dance with her new husband, radiant with happiness. "She's beautiful," Melissa said, her voice breaking slightly. "They both are. Dylan and Sophie. You did a wonderful job with them." "We both contributed to who they are," I said, and I meant it. Whatever else had happened, Dylan and Sophie carried pieces of both of us. My analytical mind and her social warmth, my determination and her charm. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, turning to look at me directly. "I know it's far too late, and I know it doesn't change anything. But I'm sorry, Ethan. For all of it. For the affair, for the lies, for destroying what we had. You deserved better." I took a deep breath. "Yeah, I did. But you know what? I'm not angry anymore. I was for a long time. But anger is exhausting. And at some point, I just let it go." "Did you ever find happiness again?" she asked. I considered the question. "I found peace. I found purpose. I have my children, my work, a few good friends. I have a life I built myself. Is that happiness? I don't know. But it's enough. I ruined both our lives, didn't I?" she said, tears forming in her eyes. I shook my head slowly. "No, Melissa. You made choices that hurt us both deeply. But I made choices too about how to respond, how to move forward, how to live afterward. You didn't ruin my life. You changed it dramatically and painfully. But I'm the one who decided what to do with those changes." I stood up, preparing to return to my table. "I hope you find some peace too, Melissa. I really do." As I walked away, I realized something. I meant it. I genuinely hoped she could find some measure of contentment in whatever years she had left. Not because I'd forgiven everything, some wounds go too deep for that, but because carrying hatred for her would only poison whatever time I had left. The betrayal didn't define me. It was something that happened to me, something I survived, something I moved beyond. And in the end, isn't that all any of us can do? Survive what life throws at us. Do our best to heal and keep moving forward? I think it is. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.